Welcome. Come on in. It's Thursday and it's happy hour. Home happy hour to be exact. So grab a drink and let's get started. Hey everybody, it's Claire Paris and I'm here with my drink. Do you have yours for our home happy hour? Today's topic is underground storage tanks. So oftentimes they're called UST or USTs. And in homes in Portland, they were unfortunately super common. What were they? So if you can imagine your local fill up, all those humongous tanks that they put underneath the gas station, they actually put those in the yards of houses in Portland. And they would use those for heating the house. So back before we had any gas or any connection to gas, they would bury these oil tanks and then trucks would drive by and fill them up once every like 6 months or so, and you'd have heating for the rest of the winter. That was ingenious in the 50s. It was a great innovation. Unfortunately, there was a fill pipe and a vent pipe, and rain would get in there and get to the bottom of the tank, and all of these tanks were made out of steel. So it would corrode the bottom of the tank and eventually spring a leak. And unfortunately, there was no way of knowing that. So about 50% of these heating oil tanks leaked. So what does that mean to you? Imagine slowly leaching into the soil gallons and gallons and gallons of diesel. Eventually, I've seen a few of these become like serious Superfund sites, which are not super fun, by the way. Most houses, if they've been sold in the last 10 to 15 years, the buyer has searched for the tank and had it decommissioned. So decommissioning a tank is relatively inexpensive. Picture the tank looks almost like an egg. It's buried under the ground, and there are varying sizes depending on how many gallons you wanted them to hold. And what they do is they take an auger and they drill down to below where the tank is, and they take a soil sample, and they do that on either end of the tank. If it comes up black, there's oil in the soil, and I've actually seen this. It's crazy. It'll be just dripping with oil. A lot of times it'll come out clean and it'll look clean, but they'll still test it because they're looking for special chemical compounds that are harmful to humans, and they break down once they hit the air. So if none of those volatile organic compounds are in the soil, then all they do is cut the top of the tank off and clean it out, and then fill it with some inert substance like concrete or perlite, and then they bury the whole thing again. Once that's done, it's considered decommissioned and you don't have to worry about it at all. If those soil samples come back completely clean, you don't have to decommission it. You can just leave it as is. If it's dirty, whoever's tested that tank has to report it to the DEQ, and then it gets on the DEQ's their list of things to do, and then they're going to force whoever owns that property to decommission that tank. So you're probably wondering, what does this cost? Because it is a valid question. If you're a buyer, typically if there's no permit or no indication of a storage tank and the house hasn't been sold in say 20 years, you can hire a professional and they will come out and it's pretty much a magnetic search with a metal detector to see if there's a big tank in the soil. That's only about $175. There's actually a company in town that comes out with an oil sniffing dog, which is the cutest thing ever. And this dog can tell when petroleum's in the soil, and it'll just bark and sit on the spot. It's really a sight to see. But that's actually pretty minor price for the buyer. And obviously the reason why you want to do that is because otherwise you're taking on the liability of the work that you're going to have to do when the next person that's buying your house, when you're selling it, wants to buy it. They're going to want this taken care of. As far as the decommissioning goes on the seller side, if you've owned a property for 20 years and you're like, yeah, I think I remember grandma saying that she switched the furnace from oil to gas in the 80s, there's probably an oil tank, and oftentimes it's under the driveway. The whole process So 50% of most of the tanks leak, and the whole process is usually between $1,500 and $3,500. So it's not a huge liability, but there is an off chance. I mean, I've had one that was $37,000 because the oil got into the groundwater and it contaminated all the water and the soil. So it was a nightmare. So definitely test if you're gonna buy, and if you're a seller, please make sure that you know that it's a possibility this could be a problem. This is actually a pretty complex subject, so I'm happy to answer any questions that you have about it, or comment below, because I'm always intrigued to hear. I mean, there's been situations with tanks where I've had to install fans in the basement because the contamination is so great. So there's all kinds of crazy stories I'd love to hear about. Thank you so much for tuning in, and of course we're so glad you're here, and tune in next week for our home happy hour.